The confession came 47 years too late, but it finally brought closure to a family that had never stopped searching for answers. On a cold February morning in 2021, detectives at the Chicago Police Department's Area South headquarters received a phone call that would crack open one of the city's most haunting cold cases from 1974. The south side of Chicago in the mid-1970s was a neighborhood caught between hope and despair. The civil rights movement had brought promises of change, but economic hardship still gripped many families. Factory jobs were disappearing, and the community struggled with rising crime rates that would define the decade. Against this backdrop of urban transformation, families tried to maintain normalcy, sending their children to school and holding on to dreams of better days ahead. It was in this environment that 26-year-old Diane Washington lived with her two young children in a modest apartment on East 79th Street. According to family members, Diane was known throughout the neighborhood for her infectious smile and unwavering determination to provide for her family. She worked double shifts at a local diner, saving every penny she could for her children's education. Friends described her as someone who never missed church on Sundays and always had time to help neighbors in need. On the evening of November 8th of 1974, Diane finished her shift at Murphy's Diner around 9:30 in the evening. Co-workers later told investigators that she seemed in good spirits, discussing plans for her daughter's upcoming birthday party. She declined a ride home from her manager, stating she enjoyed the short walk through the familiar streets of her neighborhood. Security cameras were virtually non-existent in residential areas during this era, leaving investigators with few technological resources that would become standard decades later. Diane never made it home that night. When she failed to return by midnight, her elderly neighbor who was watching the children became concerned. Mrs. Eleanor Jackson had known Diane for 3 years and testified that the young mother had never been late without calling. According to police reports, Mrs. Jackson waited until dawn before contacting authorities, hoping Diane might have stayed with a relative due to some emergency. The initial missing person report was filed on November 9, 1974, launching an investigation that would span nearly 5 decades. Detective Raymond Foster, a 20-year veteran of the Chicago Police Department, was assigned to lead the case. Foster had built a reputation for his methodical approach to investigations and his ability to connect with families during their darkest hours. He immediately recognized that Diane's disappearance was highly unusual, given her established patterns and responsibilities as a mother. The search began in earnest within hours of the report being filed. Officers canvassed the route between Murphy's Diner and Diane's apartment, interviewing business owners, residents, and anyone who might have been in the area that evening. The investigation revealed that several people had seen Diane walking along her usual path around 10 o'clock, but no one reported witnessing anything suspicious or concerning. Family members provided investigators with detailed information about Diane's relationships and daily routines. Her sister, Gloria Washington, told detectives that Diane had not mentioned any problems with former boyfriends or workplace conflicts. Bank records showed no unusual financial activity, and there were no signs of planning for a voluntary disappearance. All evidence pointed to someone having intercepted Diane during her walk home. The case took a devastating turn 3 days later when a jogger discovered Diane's body in Washington Park, approximately 2 miles from her intended route home. According to the coroner's preliminary findings, she had suffered fatal injuries consistent with a violent attack. The location was secluded, surrounded by dense trees that provided cover from the nearby streets. Crime scene technicians processed the area using the forensic methods available in 1974, collecting what physical evidence they could find. Detective Foster and his team worked tirelessly during the initial weeks of the investigation. They interviewed dozens of potential witnesses, examined Diane's personal belongings for clues, and followed up on every tip that came through the department's phone lines. The case generated significant attention in local newspapers, with the Chicago Tribune running several articles about the investigation's progress. However, despite the dedicated efforts of law enforcement and the cooperation of the community, the case gradually grew cold. Leads dried up, witnesses moved away, and new crimes demanded the attention of detectives. The file remained open, but active investigations slowed to a crawl as months turned into years. For Diane's family, the lack of resolution meant decades of unanswered questions and unresolved grief. Her children grew up without their mother, raised by relatives who struggled to explain why someone would hurt such a kind and loving person. The South Side of Chicago in 1974 stood at a crossroads of American history. The neighborhood had weathered the turbulent 1960s, experiencing both the promise of civil rights progress and the harsh realities of urban decay. Factory closures had left many families struggling economically, while community leaders worked tirelessly to maintain hope and stability in their neighborhoods. Streetlights were sparse, and many blocks relied on the watchful eyes of longtime residents who knew everyone's routines and looked out for one another. Diane Washington had moved to East 79th Street in 1971, seeking a fresh start after her divorce. According to family accounts, she chose the area specifically because of its strong sense of community and the presence of good schools for her children. Her apartment building housed 12 families, most of whom had lived there for years and formed tight bonds that extended beyond mere neighborly courtesy. Residents regularly shared meals, watched each other's children, and organized informal neighborhood watch groups to ensure everyone's safety. The building's landlord, Harold Stevens, later told investigators that Diane was among his most reliable tenants. She paid rent on time, kept her apartment immaculate, and often helped elderly residents with grocery shopping or small repairs. Stevens described her as someone who brought positive energy to the building, organizing holiday parties for the children and coordinating group efforts to maintain the shared spaces. Her presence had a stabilizing effect on the entire community. Murphy's Diner, where Diane worked, served as more than just her workplace. The establishment had operated on South Cottage Grove Avenue since 1952 and functioned as an informal community center where neighbors gathered to share news, discuss local issues, and support one another through difficult times. Owner Frank Murphy had hired Diane based on recommendations from regular customers who knew her from church. According to employment records, she quickly became one of his most valued employees, known for her reliability and genuine care for customers. Diane's daily routine reflected her dedication to providing stability for her family. She typically worked the afternoon shift at the diner, allowing her to walk her children to school each morning and spend time helping them with homework before heading to work. Co-workers noted that she often brought homemade lunches to save money, putting every spare dollar toward her children's future education. Her dream, according to her sister Gloria, was to eventually save enough money to move the family to a house with a small yard where the children could play safely. The young mother had grown up in Mississippi before moving to Chicago in her early 20s, part of the Great Migration that brought millions of African Americans north in search of better opportunities. Family members described her as someone who maintained strong connections to her southern roots while embracing the possibilities that city life offered. She regularly sent letters and small amounts of money to relatives back home, demonstrating the generosity that characterized her interactions with everyone she met. Church played a central role in Diane's life and provided another layer of community support. She attended Mount Olive Baptist Church every Sunday, participating in the choir and volunteering for various community outreach programs. Pastor William Hayes later told investigators that Diane had recently expressed interest in taking evening classes to earn her high school diploma, hoping to qualify for better-paying jobs that would improve her family's circumstances. The neighborhood's social fabric in 1974 was both a source of strength and vulnerability. While residents looked out for one another, the area also struggled with increasing crime rates that reflected broader urban challenges facing American cities during this period. Police patrols were less frequent than in wealthier neighborhoods, and residents often relied on informal networks of communication to stay informed about potential dangers. Despite these challenges, Diane had found her place within this community. Her children attended the local elementary school, where teachers knew them by name and took special interest in their academic progress. Neighbors regularly commented on how well-behaved and polite the children were, reflecting their mother's careful attention to their upbringing despite the demands of working multiple shifts to make ends meet. This was the world that Diane Washington inhabited on that November evening in 1974. A world where community bonds ran deep, but where danger could still lurk in familiar shadows. The evening of November 8, 1974, began like countless others for Diane Washington. According to witness statements collected by investigators, she completed her shift at Murphy's Diner with her characteristic efficiency and positive demeanor. The restaurant's evening rush had been steady but manageable, and Diane had earned good tips from regular customers who appreciated her attentive service. Manager Robert Chen later told police that Diane seemed particularly upbeat, mentioning her excitement about planning her daughter's birthday celebration the following week. Security protocols at Murphy's Diner followed standard practices for small businesses in 1974. Employees were responsible for their own transportation home, and the establishment closed at 10 o'clock each evening. Chen confirmed that Diane left the restaurant at approximately 9:30, declining his offer of a ride home, as she typically did. Surveillance technology was limited to a basic alarm system, providing no visual record of the evening's events. The route from Murphy's Diner to Diane's apartment covered 8 blocks through a residential area that she had walked hundreds of times over the previous 3 years. Street lighting was inconsistent, with several blocks relying on illumination from storefront windows and porch lights. According to police reports, the path took her along South Cottage Grove Avenue before turning onto quieter residential streets leading to her building. Multiple witnesses confirmed seeing Diane during the early portion of her walk home. Store owner James Patterson told investigators he observed her passing his hardware shop around 9:45, noting that she appeared to be walking at her normal pace and showed no signs of distress. 2 other residents reported similar sightings along her usual route, with the last confirmed observation placing her near the intersection of East 78th Street and South Vernon Avenue at approximately 10 o'clock. The timeline established by investigators indicated that something occurred during the final 3 blocks of Diane's journey home. This section of her route passed through a less populated area where residential buildings were spaced farther apart and street lighting was particularly poor. According to police analysis, this location would have provided someone with the opportunity to approach Diane without being easily observed by potential witnesses. Mrs. Eleanor Jackson's growing concern throughout the night reflected the unusual nature of Diane's absence. Jackson had been watching Diane's children for nearly 3 years and was intimately familiar with the young mother's punctual habits. Police reports documented Jackson's statement that Diane had never been more than 30 minutes late without calling to explain her delay. The elderly woman spent the night checking the windows and listening for footsteps in the hallway, hoping to see Diane returning safely. The formal missing person investigation began at dawn on November 9th, when Jackson contacted the Chicago Police Department. Responding officers immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation based on the circumstances Jackson described. The initial report triggered standard protocols for missing person cases, including immediate notification to area hospitals and a preliminary canvass of the neighborhood. Detective Raymond Foster's arrival at the scene marked the beginning of a comprehensive investigation. Foster's experience with similar cases led him to treat Diane's disappearance as a potential crime from the outset, rather than assuming she had left voluntarily. His decision to immediately secure potential evidence and begin systematic interviews proved crucial to preserving what information was available. The discovery of Diane's body 3 days later in Washington Park transformed the missing person case into a homicide investigation. According to official reports, a morning jogger contacted police after making the tragic discovery in a secluded area of the park. The location was approximately 2 miles from Diane's intended route home, suggesting that she had been transported there after the initial incident. Crime scene technicians employed the forensic methods available in 1974 to process the area where Diane was found. The investigation team collected physical evidence and documented the scene using photography and detailed written reports. Coroner's findings indicated that Diane had suffered fatal injuries, but the specific details were withheld from public disclosure to protect the integrity of the ongoing investigation. The transformation from missing person case to homicide investigation brought additional resources and expertise to the effort to find Diane's killer. Detective Raymond Foster assembled a task force within 48 hours of Diane Washington's body being discovered. The team included 3 additional detectives, 2 crime scene specialists, and a liaison officer to coordinate with the coroner's office. According to departmental records, the Chicago Police Department allocated significant resources to the case, recognizing both its severity and the community's demand for swift justice. The initial investigation focused on establishing a comprehensive timeline of Diane's final hours. Detectives conducted door-to-door interviews throughout the South Side neighborhood, speaking with residents, business owners, and anyone who might have observed unusual activity on the evening of November 8th. The canvassing effort expanded to cover a 6-block radius around both Diane's apartment building and the location where her body was found. One of the first investigative theories centered on the possibility of a random street crime gone wrong. Chicago in 1974 was experiencing rising crime rates, and muggings in poorly lit areas were unfortunately common. Detectives examined recent police reports for similar incidents in the vicinity, looking for patterns that might connect Diane's case to other crimes. This line of inquiry led investigators to interview several individuals who had been arrested for robbery or assault in the preceding months. The investigation team also pursued the theory that Diane might have been targeted by someone she knew. Detectives conducted extensive background checks on her former husband, co-workers at Murphy's Diner, and other men in her social circle. According to police files, each potential suspect was thoroughly investigated, with alibis verified and personal histories examined for any indicators of violent behavior. This process consumed weeks of investigative time, but failed to produce viable leads. A significant challenge emerged from the limited forensic technology available in 1974. Crime scene technicians had collected physical evidence from Washington Park, but DNA analysis would not become available to law enforcement for another decade. Fingerprint analysis was conducted on items found at the scene, but the results did not match any individuals in the police database. Blood typing provided some information, but lacked the specificity that modern forensic methods would later offer. Investigators also struggled with the 2-mile distance between Diane's last known location and where her body was discovered. This geographical gap suggested that she had been transported, either voluntarily or by force, from her neighborhood to Washington Park. Detectives spent considerable time trying to determine how this transportation occurred, interviewing taxi drivers, bus operators, and anyone who might have witnessed suspicious vehicle activity during the relevant time frame. The case generated numerous tips from community members eager to help solve the crime. Police reports documented over 200 phone calls during the first month of the investigation, ranging from potential witness sightings to theories about possible suspects. Each tip required follow-up investigation, stretching the department's resources and creating a complex web of information that proved difficult to organize and analyze effectively. One particularly promising lead emerged when a witness claimed to have seen Diane talking to an unknown man near the intersection where she was last definitively observed. Detectives spent weeks trying to identify this individual, creating composite sketches based on the witness's description and distributing them throughout the neighborhood. However, the witness later admitted uncertainty about the timing and details of the observation, undermining the reliability of this potential evidence. The investigation also explored the possibility that Diane's murder was connected to her workplace at Murphy's Diner. Detectives examined the restaurant's customer base, looking for individuals who might have developed an unhealthy interest in Diane or who had exhibited concerning behavior. This line of inquiry included reviewing the diner's informal credit arrangements and examining whether Diane might have inadvertently become involved in any disputes or conflicts related to the business. Communication technology limitations in 1974 hampered coordination between different law enforcement agencies. Information sharing between the Chicago Police Department and surrounding jurisdictions relied primarily on telephone calls and written reports, making it difficult to quickly cross-reference similar cases or identify suspects who might have committed crimes in multiple areas. The forensic analysis of evidence collected from the crime scene proceeded slowly due to the manual processes required for laboratory work in that era. Results that might be available within days using modern technology took weeks or months to complete, creating delays that allowed potential leads to grow cold while investigators waited for scientific confirmation. By the spring of 1975, the active investigation into Diane Washington's murder had slowed to a crawl. Detective Raymond Foster and his team had exhausted their immediate leads, interviewed hundreds of potential witnesses, and followed up on every credible tip that came through the department's phone lines. The case file had grown to over 300 pages, documenting months of meticulous police work that had failed to identify a viable suspect. According to departmental records, the investigation officially transitioned to cold case status in June 1975, though Foster continued to work on it sporadically for several more years. The impact on Diane's family proved devastating and long-lasting. Her children, now being raised by their aunt Gloria Washington, struggled to understand why their mother would never come home. Gloria later described the challenge of explaining the situation to young children while dealing with her own grief and the family's financial difficulties. The loss of Diane's income from Murphy's Diner created immediate economic hardship, forcing Gloria to take on additional work while caring for her niece and nephew. The South Side community responded to the unsolved murder with a mixture of fear, anger, and determination. Residents organized informal safety patrols, with neighbors walking together during evening hours and keeping closer watch on each other's movements. According to newspaper archives from the Chicago Tribune, community leaders held several public meetings during 1975 to discuss safety measures and pressure police officials to maintain their investigative efforts. Murphy's Diner became an unofficial memorial site where regular customers would gather to share memories of Diane and discuss theories about what might have happened to her. Owner Frank Murphy reported that business initially declined as people avoided the area, but gradually returned as the community refused to let fear completely alter their daily routines. Murphy kept Diane's photograph posted behind the cash register for years, serving as a constant reminder of the unsolved case. The investigation's transition to cold case status reflected broader challenges facing urban police departments during the mid-1970s. Rising crime rates across Chicago meant that detectives were constantly being assigned new cases, making it difficult to maintain focus on unsolved murders that lacked fresh leads. According to police department statistics, homicide clearance rates in Chicago dropped significantly during this period, with many cases joining Diane's in the growing cold case files. Detective Foster's retirement in 1982 marked another turning point for the case. Foster had maintained personal interest in solving Diane's murder throughout his remaining years on the force, occasionally reviewing the file and following up on new information that emerged. His replacement, Detective Harold Barnes, inherited dozens of cold cases and lacked the personal connection that had driven Foster's continued attention to Diane's case. The 1980s brought significant changes to the South Side neighborhood where Diane had lived and died. Urban renewal projects demolished several buildings, including Diane's former apartment complex, erasing physical reminders of her presence in the community. Many longtime residents moved away, taking with them first-hand knowledge of the people and circumstances surrounding the 1974 murder. The institutional memory that had preserved details about the case began to fade as witnesses relocated or passed away. Advances in forensic science during the 1980s and early 1990s offered new hope for solving cold cases. But Diane's case presented unique challenges. The physical evidence collected in 1974 had been stored according to the preservation standards of that era, which proved inadequate for some of the newer testing methods. Additionally, budget constraints limited the Chicago Police Department's ability to retest evidence from older cases unless new information specifically warranted the expense. Gloria Washington emerged as the primary advocate for keeping Diane's case in the public eye. She regularly contacted the police department for updates, attended community meetings to discuss unsolved crimes, and maintained relationships with local journalists who occasionally wrote follow-up stories about the murder. Gloria's persistence ensured that Diane's case remained on the radar of successive detective assignments, even when active investigation had ceased. The case gained renewed attention in 1989 when the Chicago Tribune published a retrospective article about unsolved murders from the 1970s. The piece featured Diane's story prominently, generating several new tips that required follow-up investigation. However, none of these leads produced breakthrough information, and the case returned to its dormant status within a few months. By the early 2000s, Diane Washington's murder had become one of hundreds of cold cases in the Chicago Police Department's files, representing both the limitations of 1970s investigative methods and the persistent hope that advancing technology might eventually provide answers to decades-old questions. The dawn of the 21st century brought revolutionary changes to criminal investigation that would eventually breathe new life into decades-old cold cases. DNA analysis, which had been in its infancy during the 1970s, became a powerful tool for law enforcement agencies across the United States. The Chicago Police Department began investing in updated laboratory equipment and training programs that would allow investigators to re-examine evidence from unsolved cases using methods that were unimaginable when Diane Washington was murdered. In 2003, the Chicago Police Department established a dedicated cold case unit, recognizing the potential for modern forensic techniques to solve crimes that had stumped investigators for decades. The unit was staffed with experienced detectives who specialized in reviewing old cases and determining which ones might benefit from contemporary investigative methods. According to departmental records, the unit initially focused on cases from the 1980s and 1990s, where evidence preservation was more likely to meet modern standards. Detective Maria Santos joined the Cold Case Unit in 2005, bringing 15 years of homicide investigation experience and specialized training in forensic genealogy. Santos had developed a reputation for her methodical approach to case review and her ability to identify overlooked connections between seemingly unrelated pieces of evidence. Her assignment to review cases from the 1970s would eventually bring Diane Washington's murder back into active consideration. The advancement of database technology proved equally important to cold case investigations. The combined DNA index system, CODIS, allowed law enforcement agencies to compare DNA profiles from unsolved cases against samples from convicted offenders across the country. This national database had grown exponentially since its inception, creating new opportunities to identify suspects who might have committed crimes in multiple jurisdictions over many years. Digital record-keeping systems also transformed how investigators could access and analyze information from old cases. Paper files that had been stored in basement archives were gradually digitized, making it possible to search for patterns and connections that would have been nearly impossible to identify using manual methods. Cross-referencing capabilities allowed detectives to examine relationships between cases that had been investigated by different departments or during different time periods. The Chicago Police Department's evidence storage facilities underwent significant upgrades during the early 2000s to accommodate the requirements of modern forensic testing. Climate-controlled environments and improved preservation techniques helped maintain the integrity of physical evidence that had been collected decades earlier. However, many items from 1970s cases had deteriorated beyond the point where DNA analysis could yield reliable results. Diane Washington's case file was among those reviewed by Detective Santos in 2007. The original evidence collected from Washington Park had been stored according to 1974 standards, which proved inadequate for some contemporary testing methods. However, Santos identified several items that might still contain viable genetic material, including clothing fibers and other trace evidence that had been carefully preserved by the original investigation team. The process of re-examining cold case evidence required careful coordination between detectives, laboratory technicians, and legal experts. Each piece of evidence had to be evaluated for its potential to yield new information while considering the risk that testing might consume or damage materials that could be needed for future analysis. Budget constraints also played a role in determining which cases received priority for expensive forensic testing. Community advocacy groups had emerged during the 1990s and 2000s to support families of victims in unsolved cases. These organizations provided resources for families navigating the complex process of keeping old cases active and helped coordinate media attention that might generate new leads. Gloria Washington connected with several such groups, learning about advances in forensic science and maintaining pressure on law enforcement agencies to revisit her sister's case. The development of forensic genealogy represented another breakthrough that offered hope for solving cold cases. This technique used DNA analysis combined with genealogical research to identify suspects through their family relationships, even when the perpetrator's DNA was not directly in any criminal database. Several high-profile cases had been solved using these methods, generating significant media attention and public interest in the potential for resolving decades-old crimes. Training programs for law enforcement officers expanded to include instruction on new investigative techniques and technologies. Detectives learned to approach cold cases with fresh perspectives, considering evidence and witness statements in light of contemporary understanding of criminal behavior and forensic science. This educational investment helped ensure that advances in technology could be effectively applied to real-world investigations. By 2010, the combination of improved forensic capabilities, enhanced database systems, and dedicated cold case units had created an environment where solving decades-old murders became increasingly possible, setting the stage for renewed hope in cases like Diane Washington's. The breakthrough in Diane Washington's case came from an entirely unexpected source in March 2018. Detective Maria Santos received a phone call from the Illinois State Police Laboratory, informing her that a DNA profile from Diane's case had generated a hit in the national database. The match had not come from a convicted offender, but rather from a familial DNA search that connected genetic material found at the 1974 crime scene to a distant relative who had submitted their DNA to a genealogy website. This development represented the convergence of multiple technological advances that had been building momentum throughout the previous decade. Forensic genealogy had gained national attention following several high-profile cold case solutions, and the Chicago Police Department had recently partnered with specialized laboratories that could perform this type of analysis. The genetic material that produced the match had been extracted from evidence that investigators in 1974 could never have imagined would yield such specific information. The genealogy website Match pointed to a family tree that included individuals who had lived in Chicago during the 1970s. Genetic genealogist Dr. Helen Rodriguez worked with Detective Santos to analyze the family connections and identify potential suspects who would have been in the appropriate age range and geographic location during November 1974. This process required weeks of careful research, cross-referencing public records, obituaries, and historical documents to build a comprehensive picture of the family's movements and relationships. The investigation revealed that the DNA belonged to someone related to a man named Charles Brennan, who'd been 27 years old in 1974 and lived approximately 12 blocks from where Diane Washington was last seen alive. Brennan had died in 1995, but public records indicated that he had worked various jobs in the South Side area during the 1970s, including a brief period as a maintenance worker for the Chicago Transit Authority. His employment records showed that he would have been familiar with the neighborhood where Diane lived and worked. Detective Santos faced the challenge of building a case around a suspect who had been deceased for over 2 decades. Traditional investigative methods such as interviews and surveillance were obviously impossible, requiring her to rely entirely on historical evidence and witness testimony from people who might remember events from 44 years earlier. The passage of time had eliminated many potential sources of information, but it had also created opportunities to examine Brennan's entire life history for patterns that might connect him to other crimes. The investigation into Charles Brennan's background revealed a troubling pattern of behavior that had never been properly documented by law enforcement. Family members, when contacted by Detective Santos, described him as someone who had struggled with alcohol abuse and had exhibited increasingly erratic behavior during the 1970s. Several relatives mentioned incidents where Brennan had made inappropriate comments about women or had been asked to leave family gatherings due to his conduct. Court records from the 1970s and 1980s showed that Brennan had been arrested multiple times for minor offenses, including public intoxication and disturbing the peace, but had never been charged with any violent crimes. However, the pattern of arrests clustered around the South Side area where Diane Washington had lived and worked, suggesting that Brennan had been a regular presence in that neighborhood during the relevant time period. The most significant discovery came when Detective Santos located Brennan's former landlord, who had maintained detailed rental records from the 1970s. These documents showed that Brennan had been evicted from his apartment in December 1974, just 1 month after Diane's murder, for failure to pay rent and disturbing other tenants. The landlord, now in his 80s, recalled that Brennan had seemed particularly agitated during November 1974 and had made several late-night disturbances that prompted complaints from neighbors. Further investigation revealed that Brennan had left Chicago abruptly in early 1975, moving to Detroit, where he lived under various aliases for several years. This pattern of relocating and using false identities suggested someone who was attempting to avoid law enforcement attention. Detroit police records showed that Brennan had been questioned in connection with several assaults against women during the late 1970s, though he was never formally charged due to insufficient evidence. The genetic evidence, combined with the circumstantial connections between Brennan and the time and place of Diane's murder, provided Detective Santos with the strongest lead the case had seen in over 4 decades. However, building a prosecutable case against a deceased suspect would require additional evidence and careful legal consideration of how to proceed with charges when the perpetrator could no longer face trial.